is Judy Yero. I live in Hamilton, Montana, and until May of last year, I knew nothing about AERO. I attended the conference at AERO, and since that time, I have been a strong proponent of alternative education. And last fall, I was given the opportunity to make a trip around the United States. I drove 9,000 miles in 6 weeks. Starting in Hamilton, I went to Seattle, down the West Coast, across Texas, up the East Coast, and back home. I had hoped to visit some schools in the middle of the country, but by the time I turned the corner in New York, I was like the horse who wanted to get back to the barn. What I did, I wanted to see what the range of alternative education was, different structures, and also what common factors there were. And that's what Jerry originally asked me to talk about. So at the same time, I was taking the school starter course with Jerry and Chris, and they mentioned the word non-negotiables. And so I started to think in terms of, okay, if I were starting a school, what would be my non-negotiables? If you saw Beyond Measure last night, you're not going to hear anything new. And I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. This is my impression or my opinion of what the important factors are. The first one is, to me, the foundation of everything else. The perception of and respect for children as individuals, which leads then to relationships between and among the adults and the younger learners. And that is the foundation for everything. I'd like to read just 3 comments that kind of encapsulate what that means. One of the schools I visited was Avison Charter School. It was a public charter school in Altadena, California, a charter started by educators, not hedge fund managers. And their motto is, "No child left unknown." The second one is from Casa Middle School. It's a Cornerstone Academy of Social Action in the Bronx. It's the children of color, it's all children of color, and the principal's name is Jamal Bowman, and I met him at the AERO conference last year, and we kind of were like we're soulmates for some reason. And one of his children said, "Mr. Bowman gives every student his personal cell phone number. He leads Community Circle every week, making this school feel like a family. He's not afraid to let students see him laugh, dance, or cry. He's real with us. He makes us feel we're loved." And something similar from the Circle School in San Antonio, Texas. This was a parent. "This school is exactly what we wanted for our children. They are nurtured, encouraged, and loved throughout the day." When you walk into one of these schools, if those of you who were fortunate enough to go to Renaissance yesterday, when you walk into that school and the children are there is a felt sense of family and of love. And it's really remarkable. The second factor, which is really closely related to the first, it depends on the first, is trust. And that's trust in both directions. The American public school system was modeled after the Prussian system, which was also based on Calvinist beliefs that children were lazy and can't be trusted. So it was the role of the schools to make them socially acceptable. And unfortunately, that's what transferred here, and I think a lot of public school teachers, not because they don't care about the kids, but they still believe that learning is a result of teaching. They don't trust the children to be born ready to learn. They don't, for some reason, recognize the fact in the first 5 years of life, the children have learned the most important things in their life, which is to walk and communicate. But all of a sudden, when they get to be 5 or 6, you have to sit them down at a desk and start pouring stuff into their heads. So anyway, public schools, or I call these schools learner-centered schools, alternative schools. They believe that children were born to learn, and they trust them to learn. The opposite is equally true. The trust of the children for the adult, because in many cases, children don't have an adult that they can fully trust. And once they know that an adult sees them and hears them and respects them, they will do almost anything. They know that person wants what's in their best interest. And that's what I found interesting I think that that's why there is such a range. There can be such a successful range of learner-centered schools, from totally free school, free democratic school, to schools that look pretty much like traditional schools, but when you walk in, you can feel that difference. The children will follow whatever you want. If you want some structure, yeah, we'll do that because we know that you care, we want what's in our best interest. The third one, again, no surprise, self-direction. As much self-direction and self-choice as possible, choice in what they do. Now that does not mean that there can't be structure. I know that some people are sold on democratic free schools as the ultimate, but I think we're making a mistake, the same mistake they make in one-size-fits-all public education, if we think that all alternative education needs to be the same. There are children who need more structure, and there are children who don't want any, and we need all those options for them. Also, if you think about, teachers in public schools typically think of themselves as transmitters of information, whereas in the learner-centered school, they call themselves teachers, facilitators, mentors, guides, whatever you want to call them. There's lots of different names, but they see themselves as facilitators of learning. I like the metaphor of curators of learning environments, providing information, providing content in as many different ways as possible. You think about the Reggio statement of the 100 languages of children, or multiple intelligences, or learning preferences. It's even more than that. There is a book that I highly recommend. It's called The End of Average by Todd Rose. If you read that book, and it's good for everybody, regardless of what you do, it isn't all about education. He gives the background of where the concept of average came from. And he provides research, all kinds of research on why any system designed for average suits no one. It's an excellent book and really highly recommended. So we need the variety. In terms of Parker Palmer, who wrote The Courage to Teach, his metaphor for his role as a teacher is a shepherd. And when I read that, I didn't like it because it casts the students in the role of sheep. Yeah, which, no, I don't think so. But when you read further, you realize what he's focusing on is his own role. He locates pastures that are great, a lot of nourishment in them. He guides the students to the pasture and then he lets them go. And another idea about having structure, having some structure, is a teacher from Australia said, before you can learn to think out of the box, you have to have a box. Which is kind of a neat idea. Okay, the other thing that brings with self-direction, of course, is motivation. Because motivation arises when somebody sees a purpose in something. And having somebody tell them what, when, and how to learn for 12 years is, what's the motivation? There's not there. Another part of that, again, active rather than passive learning. And that doesn't mean that they have to be doing something all the time, but they have to be actively engaged in deeply thinking about something, one way or the other. The project-based learning, that was part of the Beyond Measure last night, but they were doing real project-based learning. Some of the things I've seen worry me, because it's like they give the kids a recipe or a blueprint, and then they have them do that. That's not active learning. That's not self-directed learning. Okay, finally, the last major one for me is self-reflection. Self-reflection built into as much as possible. Sometimes at Renaissance, for example, it's built into every single project. It's an ongoing piece of every single project. They plan something, they do it, they reflect on it, they go back and change it, and at the end they reflect on what they have learned, what they would like to do now, and then how they would do it differently the next time perhaps. But that's how they learn about their own learning. They learn to become self-learners, lifelong learners. Another one that isn't present everywhere, but it would be a non-negotiable for me, would be integrated learning. Not teaching science and math and chemistry. I used to say I taught chemistry and physics when I taught high school and public school, and I used to say, go out. You can't go out and find chemistry without biology and physics and math and, social studies and everything else. So you start with a real-world project that has within it all of these disciplines, if you will, and then when the student figures out that they need to know something, they learn it. That's where the academic learning comes in. You don't teach learning arts separately and math separately. You do the fundamentals, obviously, the skills, but beyond that. I think the easiest way to separate or to distinguish between public education and traditional education and learner-centered education is by reading their mission statements. It's amazing to me how few people have ever read the mission statement of the U.S. Department of Education. So I will share it with you. ED's mission is to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. They are masters of glittering generalities. I don't think by global competitiveness they're talking about the Olympics. It's all about the economy. Even in the State of the Union message, the only 2 times education was mentioned, it was about work and professions and getting a job and, Okay, it puzzles me because, let me read the 2 from learner-centered schools. We develop accomplished, confident, and creative learners who are prepared to be leaders in building a compassionate and environmentally sustainable world. That's 1. We are committed to the development of the whole child by cultivating the body, mind, heart, and spirit. We cultivate a thriving and compassionate community while individualizing education, fostering a lifelong love of learning, and providing the confidence and leadership skills needed to become impactful citizens of the world. Doesn't it make sense that a child trained that way would contribute to the economy? I mean, it's not a dichotomy. It isn't either or. Okay, I asked the director of the Renaissance School, whether she had trouble finding teachers. And she said, yeah. She said they come in and they want to teach here. But the first question out of their mouth is, where's the book? I don't think people realize how extreme the mindset change has to be. That it has to go from perceiving individuals. If you perceive individuals, there's no need for labels. There's no gifted. There's no remedial. There's no ADHD. They're all different. And so you get rid of the labels and you treat them as individuals. You see them. You listen to them. So Parker Palmer, in his book, said, teaching, like any truly human activity, emerges from one's inwardness, for better, for worse. As I teach, I project the condition of my soul unto my students, my subject, and our way of being together. So just a little plug, if you're interested in delving into the condition of your soul or bringing your unconscious beliefs and values that are the fundamental or the foundation of your choices, I'd like to invite you to my workshop on Saturday morning at 9:30. So do we have... Yeah, I was hoping there'd be time for questions. Anybody have a question?
Let's see. Okay, so. Yeah,
No questions? Yes.
Judy, I'm curious how many of these schools that you visited were in fact public schools?
Just 2. The charter school. The reason I went to that one is because they are as close to being learner-centered as they can be and still be a public school because they have to take the standardized tests. So they use the personal mastery learning. But each child, in addition to learning the skills, there's a separate component of using the skills, which is the thing that doesn't happen that often. Yeah.
And then just a follow-up, since all of these schools were independent schools, I'm curious about diversity, affirmative action, accessibility.
AERO's mission is to make alternative education available to every child. That is not going to happen until we get it into the public schools. There, Chris said during the school starter workshop that we need to work in both directions. We need to keep creating the alternative schools, but we also need to get our foot in the door. I'm seeing my role at my age at this point in stirring the pot. I think parents and traditional teachers who just don't realize what's available, we need to show them, we need to invite them into the alternative schools and show them what's possible and show them how the kids are. They would walk in the door and they will know the difference. They will feel the difference. So yes, the diversity is not there. Even though Wren, for example, they're totally diversified. Anybody is welcome. It's just that who can afford it. The only thing about Wren is, and in most of these schools, their per pupil, their tuition is not much different than the per pupil expenditure in the public schools. Wren is equivalent to the per pupil expenditure here in this county. So it's not a matter of money. It's just a matter of a flip in the mindset. It's a huge flip. Yes.
Thanks very much for that. I really appreciate that you did all that work in putting this together. It's important information. What I want to ask you is in relation to those non-negotiables, which school met those non-negotiables best?
Oh. You're putting me on a spot. Now, understand that this is a personal opinion, obviously. It's my own values, what I value to see. 3. Teacher Times Preschool in Seattle, Renaissance, and Rainbow Community School in Asheville. It's not that the others weren't good, but those 3, and Renaissance is probably up. I've been back 3 times now because I can't stay away. If I were 20 years younger, I'd move out here and go to work for them.
one more question.
Okay.
Hi, I just, to channel John Gatto for a minute, his statement that this economy would not survive one generation of truly educated people. I think that you're making a big assumption that public schools or the public education has something to do with education. I don't think there's a lack of information about that. I've been a pediatrician for 30 years. I don't think there's a lack of information about the destructiveness of standard mass compulsory schooling. I think that there isn't a desire for it from an economic perspective. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is that I will not let that stop me from trying to change it. No, I mean, what are they going to do to me at my age? I don't have to worry about getting a job, and I realize that teachers have to do that, but they're being torn. Their values, West was saying this morning, she couldn't teach in a public school because it would tear her apart because her values are so, if you love children, it's first do no harm. And they know they're doing harm. So I have seen the opt-out movement in New York work. Now, it's just the tip of the iceberg. They're only opting out of the tests, which are just barely the tip of the iceberg. But I think if we could empower the parents and the teachers, that we can make a difference. Jamal, who's the principal at Bronx, he said he thinks we can do it within 10 years. It's wishful thinking, but there's one thing, real quick. The fall of the Berlin Wall followed immediately by the fall of the communist bloc in a very brief period of time. There's a Nobel Prize winning, research was done. All you need is 5 to 10% of a population to move in a certain direction, and it puts enough pressure on the system that it has to shift. So that's
Thanks a lot, Judy.
Okay.